So good afternoon. I am here with Leigh Briscoe-Dwyer, who was president of the State Council from 2006 to 2007. When you joined the State Council, were you a staff member or a management or a student? How did you begin?
I my first exposure to the council was through Tom O'Brien when I was a student at Bassett Medical Center. And then I actually joined and got involved myself after I graduated from the PharmD program at St. John's, and I was a clinical specialist at the University Hospital at Stony Brook. So, if you think about kind of how things were back then, my director was Dennis Hoffman. My direct supervisor was Tim Mirando. So they demonstrated by involvement themselves that they thought that this was important. And so it was easy for me to kind of just follow along because, they were there. And, when there was a meeting for the Long Island Society, everybody went.
You're getting to my second question was, who did you meet that made you want to advance? Was there anybody else?
I think the first person that I saw that I looked at that I was kind of like, wow, was Nancy DeLegro, because she was president when I first started getting involved. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't even know, what do you have to do to be president of the New York State Council? And so I remember, having that kind of thought to myself, about, okay, so if I do what she does, I never really thought about, advancing, in the council. I think some of it just kind of happened, it just kind of morphed into that because, I guess I'm the type of person that when I see something that needs to be fixed, I try to fix it regardless of what it is. And, let's face it, back in the early 2000s, there was a lot that needed to be fixed. Not that we still don't have a lot that needs to be fixed, but I think that there was a lot of opportunity for involvement. So, but I think the first time I actually thought of myself as moving on was when I saw Nancy as president and said, I think I would really like to do that.
Something that I don't mention often. There were first two people I met once I moved back from Kansas and started working at Monty was Nancy DeLegro and Mike Blumenfeld.
Wow.
Those are the first two people I ever met in the city. So you mentioned Nancy. How many other previous past presidents did you meet, get to know, and what were they like?
Well, I think that that the House of Delegates was always a really great place to meet with the past presidents. And let's face it, they were always very vocal. They were, and I understand that now, right? They're owners of this organization. So, certainly Marcia Gutfeld. She's so incredibly smart and passionate, and demonstrated to me that you can't be afraid to use your voice. Obviously Tom O'Brien, he's one of my favorite people. Because I knew him as a student, he's one of those people whose opinion to this day still matters. It's like, Tom's opinion of me and wanting to make him proud is still something that I'm striving for today. Harvey Maldo was the person who actually installed me as president of the Long Island Society of Health System Pharmacists. And then, I'm going to say some of the older generation at that point. Norm Gallagher. Norm and I still talk, probably a couple times a month. Just that, he took an interest and asked me what I was doing, and was always impressed at the things that we were doing at that point in a clinical aspect that he of course never really had a chance to do. But I think that we really got along well because we appreciated the things that were different, but the things that were alike about one another.
Okay.
Oh, I can't forget about Davy Blanchard, but I served on the board with him. So, he wasn't necessarily a past president. He was one of my leaders. So,
Okay. Um, what challenges did you see as a member, a board member, and then as president of the organization?
I think that the limited scope of practice of pharmacists was something that I felt, both as a practitioner, right? And that morphed into what I saw as a member. And that was probably one of the things that made me want to get involved, and become more involved. And so I know that I'm wicked dating myself, but the first thing that we had to lobby for was mandatory continuing education for pharmacists, right?
That's right.
We couldn't build on anything from a scope of practice standpoint until we got mandatory CE. So I remember walking the halls of Albany, of the Capitol in Albany, with Harvey Maldow and Mike Blumenfeld, talking about why we needed to have this. And you look back now, and it almost seems archaic that we had to ask for mandatory CE to be able to establish everything that we got then moving forward. So the 10 years that I was on the board was a consistent struggle, for CDTM. The fact that it took so long still is frustrating. The fact that it's still not optimal is frustrating, but I think that overall that was the thing that, was the thread that wove through all of my years as a member, and my years on the board, and my years as president.
Okay. Membership always seemed to be a problem or an issue. Do you remember what members wanted when you were president?
I think that at that particular point, they still, I think, were looking for a professional home. And I think that we were able to offer that. But I think that also that was a time when people started to get their attention started getting diverted, because there was so many things going on at work. There were some significant pharmacist shortages then. So that was one of those times when we really couldn't find pharmacists. So that was the big issue, is that we didn't have enough staff. And so our budgets and our overtime were being, and we had to choose what services we wanted to offer. So I think that those were the struggles that the members had, is, how do we fix that? And is there a way that we can be stronger together and fix it with that single voice?
Okay. How often did the board meet? Was it professional? Was there camaraderie? Or was it, was it more camaraderie or more professional? Let me phrase it that way.
I think that in my opinion, it was the right mix. We met, I'm going to say we met at least 4 times a year, and then we had, the meetings, the annual assembly. We had that fall meeting. We got together at ASHP when we went as that delegation. So there were many opportunities for us to get together. Most of the time, we always came in the night before. And that was something that we did it was very informal. We would just kind of, go out to dinner somewhere, grab a pizza. And I still, to this day, I believe that that's when the work got done. Right. So, that's when we deliberated, and that's when we kind of, almost like what you see in politics today, right? It's like, if you want to get something done, you take somebody to the golf course. And that's when you kind of hashed it out. And that's when you were able to have some very frank, if you will, discussion that might not have been appropriate for a board table. But that's when it all got hammered out. So when we actually got to the board table, the thing I really appreciated about that was, you left your stripes at the door, you left your baggage at the door, and you were there to represent the membership and to do what was best for the profession as a whole. You couldn't go there and think of, okay, this is something that I want or I don't believe in. Because what you wanted and what you did or did not believe in necessarily didn't really have a role. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we had some really, really good discussion. And I look back to some of the things that happened as a result of those discussions. I know that, one of the things that you brought forward, Ted, was the fact that the timing of the board exam was such that we were not able to do a really great job of recruiting pharmacists outside of New York State once ASHP made that change that you had to have a license for a certain percentage of your residency program.
Mhm.
And I think that was just such a great example of, it's not something that impacted every pharmacist, but it certainly impacted health system pharmacists. And we brought it together and we said, this is going to be an issue and this is going to impact, it's going to have far reaching impact. And we were able to reach out to the board and have good discussion and it got changed. And, so I think that, that's sometimes when I get frustrated about all the things that didn't happen, that's one of the things that I like to remember because we did some really great stuff.
Yeah. Um, were there any major mishaps or major issues when you were president, which would be useful for future presidents not to repeat?
I'm going to remember that this is being taped. So, you know, I, you know, I think that we've made some changes in the financial oversight of the organization. I think that it wasn't necessarily when I was president, but we did have we did have an issue with some theft when I was I think I was relatively new to the board. And so, we kind of, it was one of those times when you realize that you might think of all of these people as family, but maybe they don't. And so you kind of had to we had to put some parameters around and some safety net around the finances of the organization, so that the organization would be safe and secure. So I think that's the one thing is understanding the financial oversight that you have. You have a fiduciary responsibility as a board member to make good decisions, but also to make sure that you've got, things in place so that nothing untoward can happen by one person having too much control.
Okay. The annual assembly is one of our major meetings, as you said before. What do you remember as you were a president? What were they like? Was it hectic, nonstop, crazy? Some other adjective that sounds just like that.
Well, I think it was all of the above. So I remember, the year that I was installed, I tried to make it to every committee meeting that was happening during the weekend. So we started out with the board meeting, and then we had the House of Delegates, and then there were still REF things happening, and then there were like every single committee was meeting. So I would try to make it to at least part of everybody's committee meeting. Because I think it was important that the committee members felt like that we cared about the work that they did and that we saw that they were there, right? I see you and I hear you, and if I am here to be able to, if there's something that's mission critical, I'm a straight shot to the board table. So there was a level of of running around, but there was also that level of excitement and that level of so many people being happy that they were there again, right? It's like it was that touchstone. No matter what was going on, you came together, and that was back when we were small enough that we could have it at the Sagamore. So, everybody felt like, okay, we're home again because we're at the Sagamore. And yeah, so it was hectic, but it was all just so worth it.
Okay.
I slept really well on Sunday night, but it was all really worth it.
Um, Last question that I'll ask, but this one's going to take a while. Generational changes. Do you feel the new members, the millennials, will be able to move the council forward based upon the philosophy that they want more personal time versus professional time, or a higher mixture of it?
I mean, I still believe, right, that a group of people can make change, right? That the statement from Margaret Mead is one of my favorites. Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world because it's the only thing that ever has. So I still firmly believe that it's my mantra. I think that today's young pharmacists are pulled in a bunch of different directions. And then I think that there's, and some of them may have to do with COVID, but I think that there's a little bit of I'm going to say that there's not an appreciation for paying your dues. I was on the board for almost 10 years before I was president. If there was a committee, I mean, if you think about the annual assembly committee, and it was the PR committee, that was literally where you started. That when you got brought into the board, that was the first committee that you had, and it was horrible. It was just the worst committee that you could be on, because you had to do the publicity for the annual assembly every day, and you had to have it written and published and printed out and ready to go before dinner. And so it was, trying to get all that information, and then you had to run around and put all the things under the doors. But again, it gave you, nothing happened during that meeting that you didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you first kind of realize, how do you triage who's the people that you have to go to answer that question? So, you learn a lot, right? So you learn a lot by sitting on committees, and then by being, one of the directors, and having committees and trying to delegate things that need to be done. And then I think that so by the time I was president, I think I had learned a lot. I had a lot of history under my belt. And I think in some ways that made me a better president, not because you need to rehash history, but because you do need to appreciate it. And you need to make sure
Institutional
that,
knowledge.
yep, you need to make sure that you're moving forward, not moving backward.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know how to continue to encourage that, that, an investment in becoming president or becoming an officer in the New York State Council. It's not a short-term goal, it's a long-term goal. And specifically, once you're done, like say you were actually one of the few who actually get to be president of New York State Council, you're not finished, right? Because now, once I truly believe that once you've served as president, you now have a vested interest in the future of that organization, whether it's 2024 or 2054. I'm still going to care as much about the organization then, hopefully, maybe, as I do today. And so I think that, having that deeper understanding of what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. We're not doing it to put a check in the box. We're doing it to build a foundation, or to sometimes rebuild the foundation. So I think that, those are things that kind of that I think about. I think about it on the national level as well. But and then I guess on the converse, right? So now we don't have the luxury anymore of having 10 years to implement change. Change is going to happen so incredibly rapidly, that we don't, and pharmacists are not necessarily comfortable with change. We like things to stay the same. We like rules. We love rules, right? And what we're walking into with AI and digital pharmacy and all things, there's not going to be a rule. And so that's going to make people really, really uncomfortable. And we've got to figure out a way to deal with that, and to manage that, and to be able to take advantage of all the things that this digital world is going to offer us, so that we can, in fact, be pharmacists and do those things that we love.
Okay. Any final comments that you would like to impart on sort of,
so more than anything, I learned a lot about leading, and I learned a lot about politics, and I learned a lot about negotiation, and I learned all that stuff, which again was, important. And I use what I, learned at the council, at ASHP. I use that in my work every day. But it is truly the people that you got a chance to work with. That's what changed your life. Right? There are people that came into your life as a result of being involved in the council, that you never probably would have met otherwise. And I look back and I think I couldn't imagine my life without them. And I was, and I think sometimes this word is overly used somewhat, but I was blessed to have Joe Medicis as my president and Kim Zamet as my president-elect. And so the three of us had this amazing chemistry, and the great thing now is we might not get together often, but when we do, even if it's on a phone call, we haven't lost a thing. So that's the gift that New York State Council gives you, is, this professional satisfaction that, that you tried to do everything that you could for this profession. But the gift is the friendship of the people that you see. And when I look at all of those people from my generation, if you will, when they would bring their kids to the annual assembly and bring their kids on the ski trip, and then their kids became pharmacists. I always think that means that we all did something right, that they saw something in that made them want to be like us. And, it's things like that that give me the greatest amount of thrill.
Thank you. With that, we'll end this conversation.
My pleasure.
And